everyone, it's Tiny Games here. Welcome back to the channel. We are back in Disney Dreamlight Valley for a sort of speed build. I've only sped it up a little bit, but this is a build for Alice's home, and I guess you could say this is part one of almost like a two-part series. For this style, we're going very typical English countryside kind of vibe, so it is going to be a very natural-esque build. It's not going to be very Wonderland-esque, but that being said, I do have a Wonderland inspired build planned for Alice. So if that is more your vibe, make sure to subscribe to the channel so that you can see that build when it goes live. But this was meant to be a bit more of a natural kind of, as I said, quaint English countryside cottage vibe. That was the vibes I wanted to go with. So some of the choices I make are more related to what I think could be quite realistic in a typical English cottage, I guess you could say. I've never lived in an English cottage. Obviously I've seen plenty of them, but I guess this would be kind of like the vision I would have for an English country cottage. This would be what I would be kind of expecting or looking for and things like that. Now, obviously I wanted to go with this rose and stone fence. I just think it's so typical of a lot of English countryside sort of homes and stuff like that. They often have these stone walls that they have that kind of border the front of their properties or things like that. So I knew I had to include these. I personally went with the white. I just preferred the colour of those a bit more. I just thought that they felt a bit more sort of natural, a bit more blend-in-y, if that makes sense. Like, they weren't really eye-catching. Like, this is just meant to be a quaint little fence that borders the property. I don't want it taking attention. I don't want it to be the star of the show or anything like that. So that's kind of why I went with that over like the bright kind of like red pink coloured ones. I did start off with these heart-shaped topiaries as well with the roses, because I really liked, one, I like the base of them, how they're kind of encased in that little sort of iron kind of fence work or whatever you would call it. But I do end up changing them. I decide that they're probably a bit too whimsical. I do find a replacement and I'm like, oh, actually this is quite nice, and I think this looks a bit more natural, a bit less Wonderland-esque. I did want a fountain. I remember, I mean, my grandparents didn't live in a country house, but they did have like ponds and stuff like that. They had like water features in their garden and stuff like that. So I really wanted to include a fountain just so I had that water feature as well. I feel like that's quite common in a lot of like English countryside builds and stuff like that. I did want to use the wheelbarrows with the flowers as well. Again, this is the kind of item that I have seen in real life. I've seen people have these kind of like wheelbarrow planters. So I was like, okay, well, that kind of makes sense, and it adds a lot of florals into this build. And I really did want to include florals within it. I'm kind of going off like vibes from my nan and granddad's house. They had so many flowers. So many. And like I said, they didn't even live in the countryside. They lived in a town, but they had a massive garden, really massive. And then behind that was a massive park. It was so fun growing up. Because obviously we had this massive garden that we could hang out in. You know, we had a tree house and everything. And then we also had the park, which had all the like swings and slides and stuff like that. It was so good. It was so good. Very quaint as well in a way, but they had tons of floral bushes and things like that. I don't know why when I did this build I didn't think of the storybook veil, like the Mythopia flower patches and bushes. No idea why that completely slipped my mind, but those are two items that I would definitely consider adding to add in more of a floral detail. So if you're going to replicate it and you do have storybook veil, don't forget about those. Don't forget about those. They would be perfect to add. They would be literally perfect. Yeah, as I said, I genuinely don't know why I forgot about them. I don't know why. Yeah, this is the moment I switched for the Tangled Topiary ones. I just thought the white wooden box felt very cottagecore-esque, and like I said, it just seemed a little bit more natural to me. Like, I did want a cutesy vibe with this build, but I didn't want to have a vibe that was like too out of this world, too out of the ordinary. I wanted everything to kind of feel a bit natural. I do have, like, obviously the mushrooms behind the tree at the back, but I feel, I mean, apart from their colours, I feel like mushrooms are kind of like a part of nature, so I thought just having a cute little fairy circle was just like a cute touch. It is probably the most out of it kind of aspect of this build, but I thought it was cute. I thought it was cute. I do spend a long time searching through what's available in my furniture menu for this. I had kind of no clue going into this build what I was going to use. I just knew I wanted a lot of florals. So I do pull out these planters. I think if I didn't use these planters in the front, then I would have used the bushes from Storybook Vale. Those ones, like, you know, the pink ones, they're the ones I would have used. I got really annoyed with this, by the way. We end up having a slightly wonky fence because I wanted to have the symmetry along the front with those flowers, but unfortunately I couldn't go far enough left with my build because of that bush. It means I can't have the fence in the right place, so the kind of joining of the fence is slightly out of line. It's slightly out of line. Also, I didn't mention it in the beginning, but when I place the fence, I place it all uniform, and then what I do is I go back in and I change things up. I sometimes find that just a little bit easier because for some reason in my head it feels like the whole process is faster. It might not be. That might be something I'm making up entirely in my head, but for me that feels faster. So if any of you kind of want to do that, maybe that's a little tip. For me, that feels faster than just grabbing out each one and then rotating it manually. Like, I don't know. It's just how I feel. It's just how I feel. But yeah, I did line it with these planters. Also, if there's any weird and awkward pauses, I was watching Darcy's Love and Deep Space videos, so naturally I kept getting a bit distracted at times when I was working on this build. I'm sorry, okay, I can't help it. But yeah, so I was doing that as I was working on this build. I wanted kind of like a stone pathway leading from the front of Alice's house out of the build. Originally I tried the stone pathway we got with the Aladdin update. I think it was with the Aladdin update. But there's like kind of like a beigey stone, and that stone pathway is so much nicer than this stupid little cobblestone one. I hate this cobblestone pathway. It just looks too unnatural. It's too square. I think it's too square. It's too uniform. Like, even with flipping the directions, it's just too uniform. But the beige stone was too contrasty in colour, so I think if you didn't want to use this cobblestone pathway, you could just use the regular kind of stone path, like in the path section. I think that would have worked just as well. There is a lot of fiddling I do with things, moving things around and stuff like that, trying to decide how to fit things in. As you can see, I struggle a lot with the florals. I wanted to include a lot of floral aspects, Like I said, I don't know why I didn't think to go into the actual like foliage section. I have no idea why that kind of skipped my mind, but it did. But I wish I'd used those. But that's just like a little heads up that perhaps you can do that. Another thing that I knew in my head I wanted was like, I wanted like a flower bed, like a specific flower bed. I remember even as a kid at the house we lived in when we were very, very young, we had like a patio section, and then that was lined with like flower beds. So I did want to add a flower bed. I was like, there's no way I can't do kind of like a British countryside flower, like a cottagecore house without having a flower bed. So I did struggle for ages about how I was going to create that, and in the end I ended up using it's like the leaf strewn path, and it's the one with the borders because it has that kind of wooden frame. So I did use that in the end and just placed a bunch of the placeable foliage, because I think you can't place some flowers on pathing. So yeah, I think there's some of the foliage items that do go on paths, but not all of it. So I just went with the actual like furniture foliage over the natural ones, which yeah, that was a choice I made. That was a choice. I also wanted to use the wrought iron furniture. Again, I am praying, please can we get some sort of white wrought iron furniture, Game Loft, please. I just feel like the white wrought iron would fit in nicely. It just something about it feels a bit more high class. I don't know. I also really debated, I would have loved like a one of those swing benches, which obviously we have the ones from the Frost and Fairy Star Path, but I didn't want to use them because they've got snow on them. So I was like, well, I can't really introduce snow into this springy vibe countryside build. It just won't make sense. So naturally I had to scrap that idea, and that's why I went with the wrought iron furniture, which I think was a good idea. I do think it was a good idea in the end. I do place the kind of like the cushions and the rug there because I did think, again, it kind of has like picnic vibes. I remember as a kid we would regularly have lunch in the garden, and we'd just place a giant picnic blanket down, and we'd all go sit in the garden. We'd have a salad, have a salad and a picky bits tea. That's what we would have. So I was like, I have to have some kind of blanket or rug to represent that kind of picnic vibe. And just because this is kind of feeling a bit more of a classier, a bit more of a wealthier cottage, I guess you could say, I decided to go with the bell set. I felt the beige neutrals were quite nice for blending in with the build, but they felt a bit more elevated compared to the Frozen themed ones, which are cute, very typical picnicky vibes, but they definitely feel a bit more everyday Joe kind of picnic blanket, whereas this feels a bit more of a I'm a posh lady who must always have the finest luxuries in life. I don't know. That's probably really stupid, but that was it. That was a vibe. I did also use the leaf rug under the tree there. Again, just trying to add a bit more texture in, because the grass in this area is very plain. I do at the end of the build add in a bunch of like spawnable flowers, again just to add a bit more texture to the vibe. Like obviously going back to like my grandparents' house and stuff like that, like they had massive bits of just plain flat grass. Well, I say flat grass, it definitely wasn't flat grass, it was on like a hill, which was so much fun because when we were kids we would just lie down on the top of the hill and then just like roll down it. It was so much fun. It was so enjoyable to play in as a kid. And so I kind of wanted to recreate that vibe, but like I said, I wanted to add a bit more texture, a bit more detail in. I really wish we could have a few more You know, we have like the plumeria path and we have the magnolia path. If we could have like a set of flowers that were kind of grouped together on the floor that weren't really designed as a pathway. You could use them as a pathway, but they were just designed to add texture to the ground. Like, I'm thinking in Minecraft, maybe it's because I've been watching a lot of Minecraft videos, but I think they had an update and they introduced like a new wildflower thing. And I just thought that was cute. I thought that was cute, and I was like, we need something like this in Disney Dreamlight Valley. We need some kind of like ground cluster of flowers rather than these natural spawning flowers which stick up quite high. I need something that will add texture to the ground, kind of thing. So yeah, that's just my thoughts. Game Loft, if you're listening, please. So yeah, this was me then creating the flower bed. Obviously I wanted a couple of items that looked like they were there for, you know, the planting of the flowers and things like that, the maintenance of the flowers. Yeah, I do really wish I had put proper foliage on these. I pulled out those like giant flowers and I was like, why are you doing that? You're trying to create a realistic build here. Do not be adding in these weird and wonderful flowers. So yeah, this was me just placing the pots and stuff like that. But as I said, I do really wish I'd looked in the foliage section and thought to have used some of those pieces. Because I think they would have looked better. But yeah, that's I guess a lesson for you guys if you want to recreate something like this, you know. Check your natural foliage rather than just the furniture foliage. You know, don't do what I did. But yeah, I still think this build turned out quite cute. As you can see here, this was me adding the magnolia piles, and then I do end up adding in the kind of like plumeria path and stuff like that. Again, it's just trying to add in a little bit of texture so that it looks like the ground has those, like, you know, like I think like as a kid you'd go picking the little like daisy things and they're all like at the level of the grass. They don't spring out that tall, and that was kind of what I wanted the grass to look like. Does that make sense? So yeah, I do place like sporadically a few of these paths around just to, again, add a little bit of texture, add a little bit of a vibe and things like that, just to enhance it a little bit. I do think it turned out all right in the end, even though, like I said, there are improvements that I would perhaps make to this build. I still think it turned out quite cute and definitely had the vibes I was trying to capture. I definitely wanted to do this in the meadow as well, because I felt like the meadow just represented English countryside the best, kind of thing. So yeah, obviously you could place this wherever you wanted, the plaza, the forest, or anything like that, but hopefully you find this build a bit inspiring. Hopefully it gives you some ideas of ways you could decorate the Alice build if you didn't want to go for that quirky look, which I know some people probably won't want to. Some people might want to, because I think the quirky Alice vibes will work perfectly for if you want to integrate Vanellope into your valley. If you're trying to do that, I think quirky Wonderland and Vanellope will work really well. But yeah, there will be a more quirky Wonderland inspired build on the channel too, so make sure to stay tuned for that if you are interested in seeing how that looks. I hope you enjoyed this build. As I said, I hope it gave you some inspiration. I hope you have a wonderful day. Huge shout out and thank you to all my channel members, to my subscribers, and anyone that supports the channel by liking and commenting. Your support does mean the absolute world to me. But yeah, I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye guys!